Welcome to Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson, an adoptive mom of a 19-year-old son, Joey, who's in recovery from addiction and who is struggling to find his own path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Greg Gentry, a domestic baby scoop era adoptee born in California in 1969. He's been in reunion with his maternal family members since 2006, and in 2021, he also connected with his paternal side. Greg is a facilitator and interviewer for Fireside Adoptees, a private Facebook group founded in 2021, which is committed to additional outreach through its Fireside Adoptees public Facebook page and the Fireside Adoptees Constellation private Facebook group. Greg is also an administrator and facilitator within the Adoption Trauma Network and a leader for the New Hampshire chapter of Adoptees Connect. He enjoys connecting with others in the online adoptive community and has found these interactions to be richly rewarding and supportive. So we will ask him a lot more about all of those organizations in a bit. Thank you so much for being here, Greg.
Oh, thank you, Beth. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Me too. And thank you for all the service you've done to help other adoptees in the space. You're doing an amazing job.
I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to this being a unique sort of interaction for me, speaking with an adoptive parent and wanting to be on this footing where we have some understanding of each other and of the complexities around what it is to be an adopted person and an adoptive parent.
Yes, I always tell adoptive parents the best thing you can do is listen to adult adoptees that have done some work.
Thank you.
Well, listen to all of them, listen to all of the adoptees, but especially the adult adoptees that have done some work and can relate their experience in a way that we can learn from. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. Thank you. And we appreciate when you do center adoptees. That's very important to us and not something to take lightly. Thank you.
Absolutely. I try to do that whenever I can. And if I ever goof up, just let me know.
Thanks.
So first, let's just hear about your childhood. What's your adoption story?
Well, you mentioned being born in 1969 in California. I was placed in foster care for 6 weeks of my life. I assume the adoption happened before that, but because of the way baby scoop era adoptions were handled, it was very common for an adoptee to go into foster care for a number of weeks. And it was partially, unfortunately, kind of a trial basis sort of thing to see whether there was something that they thought might be wrong with the adoptee, unfortunately.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Man.
I did have a great childhood. I was adopted into a family that had 2 natural daughters older than me. So I had 2 adoptive sisters growing up, and we all got along really well. I didn't think I was struggling with anything until probably about 7 or 8 years old. And I think I began to think about some things and wonder about some things. Apparently, my parents told me at some point around that time that I was adopted. I have no recollection of it.
Oh, they didn't tell you right at the beginning. That was not kind of the way it was done back then, huh?
They've never told me specifically when they said this, because when I was 10, I asked them directly and found out, yes, I was adopted. They said we had told you years before, and I have no recollection of that. So I couldn't tell you for sure how many years earlier that was actually told to me.
Wow. I wonder if your brain erased the memory because it was so painful, or if they were not super clear and it went over your head.
I think that probably my brain handled it, to be honest.
Yeah. Just said, too much, cannot compute.
Yeah. And it came back around. Another friend who was an adoptee helped me process. Maybe it came back around for you. Something triggered it. In this case, I was watching a TV show and someone was adopted on TV. And I thought to ask about it. And my friend said, you probably wouldn't have asked that if it were not somewhere an issue in your mind. And it connected in your head. And when you were 10 years old, you finally asked and found out about it.
Oh, wow. Gosh. Do you remember at 10 what it felt like and how your parents responded and all that?
Oh, very clearly. I can remember everything about the conversation with each of them. I remember where I was sitting. I remember how I asked. I remember their responses, and it's burned in as a permanent memory, frozen in time. Wow. It definitely manifested different feelings in me, from a resolution of some confusion, but it led to more of a disconnected feeling ultimately.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask if it was anger or sadness. It was more like pulling back.
I think the initial feeling is just disbelief and shock.
Yeah, I bet.
And pain. and then wondering, how do I fit?
Mm-hmm.
And then feeling the distance, but it's not a pulling back that anyone, in my case, I didn't do anything consciously. It was
Mm-hmm.
just an awareness.
Yeah.
There really is a difference here that's manifesting in how I'm feeling right now towards them.
Wow. But you kind of looked like your family, I'm going to guess, because you were so shocked. It was not like a big, obvious disconnect there as far as your looks.
Well, I don't think I looked like them at all, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Except for my mother. My mother's whiter skinned like I am. My
Mm-hmm.
sisters and my father are darker skinned.
Oh, so everyone would just assume that you took after your mom or something like that?
They used to ask things about that. Who does he look like? And my mom would say, he looks like himself. And that was your answer. But no, I didn't resemble them in any way physically.
Mm-hmm.
Temperamentally, I didn't resemble them. Intellectually, I didn't resemble them. So there was a lot of awareness that I was very separate from how they were.
Even before 10 or after that?
Mostly after that. Before that, I think for a couple of years, I had felt a little different, but didn't know why. I always got along well within the family, but that's actually a sign of compliance.
Yes.
Yeah. So
my adopted son was so good. I felt so lucky. I felt like such a good mom. Look at this amazing child. He's delightful, until adolescence hit and he couldn't just mask all the time anymore, the poor thing. And so now I realize, if it's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. He was delightful, but that was not his real self coming through. He was performing most of that time. So it makes me really sad that he felt like he needed to do that. And I'm sure a lot of that was on me, not doing as much as I could have to make sure he felt comfortable and to be himself.
It's a trauma response.
Yep. Yeah.
It manifests differently.
He's like, I don't want to get given away again, so I better be good.
That is in the psychology. It's also in the nervous system. So it doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yep. Yeah.
In some adoptees like me, it manifests as compliance. In some, it's more that they're very acutely aware about fitting in and always are feeling that distance. And within the family unit, there can be struggle. And often, unfortunately, the adoptee gets blamed for that when it's simply the fact that their nervous system is colliding with the situation they're in. And they're placed in such a burden at times of having to comply or having to perform, like you said here, to feel like they don't want to be abandoned again. So what do they do to fit into the family, or why do they feel like they never fit in? And it can be such a devastating thing for an adoptee, because we definitely don't want to be swallowed up, in the sense that, yes, everybody wants to be loved. But in my case, I was loved to the point where my identity couldn't shine through.
Okay. I understand.
There are obviously different ways individually. Each of us show this in different ways, but it seems like there tends to be either this compliance like I have, or this, I just don't fit. And this is really hard for me, and I don't want to be in this situation. And it should be understandable, I think, because we're in with strangers most of the time, and being sometimes around infertility and wounding of that sort, where we have a burden placed on us to fill a certain gap sometimes in people's lives.
That's impossible to fill. Yeah, that's so tough. I admit that I did not do a good job with that. We had fertility issues, and that's why we adopted, but it all happened so fast. We just flipped and went toward adoption. And then that happened really, really fast for us, just like 3 months or something. It was very quick. And no one mentioned, not like the fertility doctor, the adoption people, none of them said, hey, you better, resolve this issue over here before you start doing this other thing.
Right.
No one told me anything about that. And that's why I like to get the word out.
Sure.
Parents, figure your shit out first. Anyway, yeah, I agree that it's way too much to put on a very small child to fill up this hole in your life. It's impossible. It's too much to ask anyone. And it must be really difficult to look around at your family and not look like anyone, like literally just the mirroring not being there. I can't imagine what that must be like. I don't know if you could put that into words at all, or...
I think there are two examples that would make it pretty clear about how it felt for me. One of them was realizing when my son, who's now 24, was about to be born, that he was going to be the first person I ever saw who I was related to. Wow. Didn't know what he was going to look like at the time. And it turns out he does look a lot like me. But I remember telling my oldest adoptive sister, he's going to be the first person I've ever seen who looks like me. She was just, her mind was blown by that. She said, I never thought about something like that. And it was truly amazing to have that experience for the first time, to see this mirroring, to see what someone looked like me. Another example was when I did go into reunion, one of the first things my birth mother said when she saw a picture of me was, I noticed your watch is on your right hand.
Oh.
And she said, so you're left-handed? I said, yeah. She said, your brother's left-handed, your grandmother's left-handed, your uncle's left-handed. And if I hadn't had my watch on, I mean, she would have figured out eventually, but that was a big form of mirroring for me that I would never, I never had that in my family.
There are no lefties in your family.
No.
It is kind of a genetic thing.
Right.
Wow. Those are very important points. And I have heard that before, I guess, especially from the women's angle, when they give birth, they're like, holy cow, this child looks like me. And how could somebody, give this away?
Sure.
Those big questions just pop up when you have your own child. I understand this is a huge milestone. It can be kind of disrupting in a way for adoptees.
And it shows up in many other ways. Even people who are raised at a distance. Like I wasn't raised with one of my half brothers. I wasn't raised with any of them, but on my mother's side, he was raised over 1,000 miles away from me. But he writes the same way I do. He spells words the same way I do.
Wow.
He makes word selections the same way I do. He knows things about things I'm interested in that we've never shared together. But he says, look, here's a picture of this and this and this that I saw in a house I'm working on in Texas. I said, those are the Apollo astronauts. He says, yeah, I knew you would know who they are. And I said, how did you know who they are? Because you're much younger than I am. So these things that it's really hard to explain the power of mirroring and the impact it has on an adoptee, finally, to have something like that come into your life when you haven't had that, no matter where you looked around you.
Yeah.
Finally, for that to be in your life is really amazing.
Do you think the newer open adoptions that people are attempting to have is beneficial to keep that link, that connection with their birth family, and so they do have some of that mirroring?
I think it's intentioned to be in large part, but unfortunately, it's usually not enforceable.
Yeah.
And there are ways that, of course, it breaks down where adoptive parents pull out of it. And fortunately, like I said, there's not usually this legally binding part of it where the adoption stays open. It can really be snapped shut. And I unfortunately know a lot of cases where that happened. Open adoption didn't really exist when I was young.
Right. It wasn't even an option. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I usually hear it from the birth mothers when it happens to them. And I read their stories and talk to them about they thought they were in something better. But adoption must be better. I think society probably thinks, it stays that way. And it, unfortunately, many times just doesn't. And the child is gone again.
I remember finding out that it's literally unenforceable. It's not legally binding at all.
Right.
I was like, what? How can that be?
Almost like an honor system thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure it sounds like to the first parents, I'm going to be able to stay in touch.
Yeah.
This will be great.
I'm sure it's a selling point at the adoption agency, right? Oh, we're going to do this open.
Yes.
And then the minute somebody feels uncomfortable, bam, that door shuts and you're just done. And that's that is horrible.
Yeah,
that's
really
horrible.
Is, unfortunately.
I'm not sure which would be worse, never knowing your birth family or knowing them and then having them get taken away again. I'm not sure. They're both terrible.
I think they're both terrible. I'm going to have to say for me, it would be not knowing them ever.
Not knowing them. Yeah.
Because in reunion, things can break down. But if you've never had even the chance for it, then that's a wholly different pain.
Yeah. And so how much of your birth family have you reunited with and how did that go?
So I've reunited with both sides now at this point. First was my mother's side in 2006. And I'm no longer, at least not at this point, in reunion with her because there have been ups and downs in that. There are a lot of complexities in reunion that adoptees are not prepared for, or they think they are, and there's no way fully to be, because until you're in it, you don't know what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
But I'm still in touch with a half brother and half sister through her.
Okay.
And I still have grandparents that are alive. So I'm 53 years old and I actually have a grandmother and a grandfather who are still alive. I'm not in touch with either one of them.
Okay.
But it's kind of strange, right? So here I am, going to be 54 this year, and my grandparents are alive. Gives you an idea of how young my birth mother was.
Oh, very much so. And have you tried to reach out to them, or is that just a no-go?
I have met my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
Not my grandfather. He, as far as I know, was not told I was found. I think he was instrumental in the adoption taking place. And they've actually said, because they're all estranged, that they didn't want him to know about me being found.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of complexity around that in terms of how I feel about I can process it different ways. They're protecting me, which I really don't want them to do because I'm an adult, and that's a big problem.
You're a grown up, yeah.
Adoptees too being infantilized.
Yeah.
But also they've told me all these things, and I don't know what to think about him because of what I've heard as well.
Wow.
So I'd rather have the chance to have the experience.
Yeah.
But I don't even know how to reach him at this point.
Okay. And how about on your dad's side? Were you able to meet your dad? Or?
Well, my dad died in 1988, I found out.
Oh, wow.
And I found that out shortly after I found my birth mother.
Okay.
So he died when I would have been 19.
Ooh, wow.
Now, I found out he lived probably about 5 miles from where I grew up.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You passed him on the street probably.
Yeah, I think probably. Had no clue. He was also young, of course, and he died at 33, but he did have 5 other sons.
Okay.
I've been in touch with 4 of them now, and in touch with his widow, and also a couple of my aunts and uncles who were his brothers and sisters.
Okay, nice. And this part of your family, you just started connecting with last year, right? Or 2021?
Right. The very end of the year of 2021. And then I met one brother in person in February of 2022. He and his wife had me in their home, which was great. It was wonderful. Because of these weird synchronicities that sometimes happen in the lives of adoptees, I ended up being in the same state as Montana, where he lives, and another one of my brothers lives. It turned out they had actually gone to school about 5 miles from where my parents retired to Montana, even though my parents were from San Diego, basically.
Wow. Montana is not very many people are in Montana. So the fact that 3 of you are connected
strange.
Montana,
Yeah.
That is strange.
And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to meeting another brother in person next month. Really excited about that opportunity.
Yay.
Thank you.
Oh, that's so exciting. Now, why did it take so long to find your paternal family? Was it like a DNA issue or just a closed door situation? Or
haven't done any DNA. It had to do with absorbing only the side of my father that I had heard from my birth mother and not having anything to compare it to. She wasn't saying terrible things about him. I internalized things she had told me as he wasn't interested in me, or I heard he walked down the other side of the street to get away from her and things like this. And I put that inside of me as he didn't want to know. So I kind of pushed it out of my mind for years, even telling her I didn't want to find him. But I eventually was like, I do want to find that family. I know he's died, but I'm interested. I didn't know he had any other children. I thought because he had died young at 33, maybe there wasn't anyone else. But when I finally did connect back in November of 2021, and I had an adoptee friend who helped me find who the family, who we thought was the family.
Nice.
He said, I think these are the right people. These are who you want to reach out to. And eventually I did in November of 2021. And I happened to connect to the wife of one of my uncles. And I said, I have this information. And it's weird because when you do something like this cold, you have to be very roundabout in terms of talking about who you are, what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's a little awkward, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't just come out and say, I'm I think I was given away from the side of that side of the family. It was, I think I might be in your family tree, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering if you can help me with some details. That's the way I approached it.
Nice.
But it took all those years. It took basically 14 years between these 2 reunions happening to finally say, all right, I think I'm ready to do this. And I'm very glad that I did, though.
Yeah. Well, good luck meeting your other brother. That's so cool.
Thank you.
And do you like the idea of coming out of the fog? Not the fog part, but do you like that phrase, coming out of the fog? And if so, when did you, or are you?
Very much. And I will say that it's so individualized for adoptees that they probably, all of us each have different understanding of it. Some adoptees don't connect with the idea at all. Some were never in the fog, so to say, like transracial adoptees often didn't have a cushion like the fog. They were so aware of being other where they grew up or how they grew up that they were never in the fog. But to me, yes, it was for people who've been in the adoption fog, it's a very real place. And it colors everything you think about yourself. And you don't even know you're doing it until either by a process, or in my case, it was both a process and then a single event that suddenly I was on the other side of the fog and I didn't even know what had happened to me. It was very dramatic. It's often often more of a process, I think, for people than it was for me, because I actually have like a timestamp of
Wow.
the moment it happened and what happened and how it precipitated for me.
Wow. Are you willing to share that event or no?
Yeah, I can tell you, I can try to describe that for you.
Okay.
It was right after I'd started on social media, July of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I joined for other reasons. I joined to try to follow something that my daughter was interested in. And I thought to connect adoptees, and I'd never connected with adoptees before. I didn't know how to do that. I joined one or two groups, and I started seeing discussions about the fog. What is that? And then I was starting to wonder about, what am I thinking here? What's going on with me? I saw a picture. This was on July 20th, 2021. About, and I say I have this timestamp because I had a picture of this. It was like 10:30 at night.
Okay.
I saw a picture of somebody in one of the adoption groups I was in, and I was frozen looking at this picture. Like, what's going on with this picture of this person? It's a young woman. I thought, I don't understand what I'm looking at here. She's just sitting there smiling. It's just a nice, pleasant picture of somebody. And my mind started kind of reeling back and forth. And I went to the photo album that I had received during my reunion and opened it to a picture of my birth mother the year before I was born. And it was like the spitting image of the person I was looking at from the Facebook group.
Wow.
I went into the bathroom and we're locking the door. And I was hysterical from it. I was hyperventilating. I didn't know what was going on.
Wow.
It was like, felt like a panic attack feels like.
Yeah.
It was the whole world upside down. And I didn't know why. I didn't know what it was. The next day I tried to explain it to a friend who was in town. And I said, I don't know how to explain this to you. I wrote a text, and I still have that text that I sent him. And I said, I saw somebody who for a moment was my mother. And in the weeks after that, I realized that everything was different for me.
Wow. There was a before and an after. Wow.
There was. I was out. And it's not that I haven't had other moments of coming out of the fog even further, but I was on the other side of something huge, and nothing in my life looked the same after that. Because I remember thinking, as I saw this picture and I was crying uncontrollably, I remember saying, I lost everything.
Oh, you were really grieving deeply.
Oh, yeah. That was when it hit me.
And I think it's interesting that it was like a decade and a half after you reunited with her and her side of the family. So it's not like you were not looking at your adoption at all. You did enough to go reunite.
Yeah.
But didn't really deal with those deep feelings that are so difficult.
I almost came out of the fog earlier than that, right after the reunion started, when I moved to Boston from California. And I had these resources, Primal Wound and some other books that my birth mother gave me. And I was reading, I didn't get far into them, but I kept reading these things that I felt really deeply. And then I had these doubts in my mind, and I started looking up other things. And I saw people say, no, that's not scientific. That didn't happen. You can't grieve for somebody you never knew. And there's no science behind that. There's no primal wound.
Oh, no.
I went with that for the next 13 years. So I stayed in the fog.
Well, surely that's easier.
Yeah. Well, it was terrible, though, because I was really torn up over, because I knew that I was letting somebody else tell me my experience, but I didn't feel strong enough or resourceful enough to answer back to it and say, no, I can say that this happened to me. Instead, I had to say, oh, the scientists and the therapists say this didn't happen to me, so it didn't. When I found the adoptee community, and I had suddenly tens of thousands and millions of people saying this happened, and I was like, okay, I understand.
Oh, okay. And for some reason, your psyche said, okay, now we're ready now.
Yeah, that's a big point about the fog.
And then the floodgates opened.
That's why you can't really and should not ever really try to move somebody out of the fog, because some of them aren't in it, first of all. Some of them don't relate to it, but others that are in it, it's not a duty of other adoptees to pull them out of it. They have to go when they're ready to go.
Yeah, it could really be dangerous because it would be really dysregulating. Even if you're really super healthy mentally, just coming to terms with that primitive grief and sadness and loss is destabilizing for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, very delicate. So you were already kind of reaching out to those support groups we were talking about earlier. That's kind of how you came across that photograph, right?
Yeah.
So did you lean in toward them when that happened, or where did you find your support right when you were coming out of the fog?
There was a small handful of people who saw this happening to me in the groups because I was brand. It happened within about 2 weeks of joining social media. That's when I came out of the fog.
Wow.
So
Okay. Wow.
people saw me floundering in these groups. I was just in a couple of them, and they saw me basically like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I don't know how to connect here either. And they very graciously made friends with me and became the first support that I knew in my adoptee life. And most of them are still friends of mine.
That's great.
And one of them in particular introduced me to a new group at the time called Fireside Adoptees.
Yay. Now you're working with them?
Yeah, they formed in August of 2021. So that was within a few weeks of me coming out of the fog.
Wow. Okay. And you jumped right into that?
I got invited in to just see what they were doing. Yeah.
And what are they doing? What's Fireside about?
Fireside was unique because they were doing a Zoom platform for people to come and talk about being adopted. And when I first joined, it was about 30-something members, I think. And I remember going on those first Zoom calls that I was a part of. And it was like all the leaders and one or two other members of the group talking, trying to draw people in. And it gradually started to grow and really took off probably in the spring of 2022. It blew up.
Okay.
It's about 700 members now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really grown a lot. And what it does that's unique, and people say when they come in, wow, I've never done this, is it gives people a chance to interact in a peer support way by listening to each other, by dialoguing with each other in a conversation like this, back and forth. Yeah. Listening to topics or listening to stories of other people, like interviews, like what I do, or just conversationally, like an open microphone. Oftentimes people will come into that space and say, I've never talked to adoptees before. I am one. I am one, but I've never talked to them. And you get to hear them open up. So that's a big objective of Fireside Adoptees, the private Facebook group, is to provide a space for people that have never had a chance to interact with others or know that there are not a lot of safe places to do so. Now, when I say safe, I'm not guaranteeing safety of what happens in any of these groups, because obviously there's no such place. There's no such thing as a safe space, but hopefully a space where people feel like they do have a chance to open up more as they get more confident. Sometimes they don't want to share, and that's totally fine. It's okay to just be there and listen, to have a camera on. We just want people to know that we're there to support them. We're not a pro-adoption group. We're not an anti-adoption group. Respect every person's story. We're a pro-adopted group, and that's our stance.
Pro-adoptee.
Pro-adoptee, yeah. And controversies happen in every group. They've happened in our group, migrated through other groups, and people leave. It's unfortunate because people are wounded. They're triggered as well, and they lash out. I've done that before. I think a lot of people have. And we hurt each other sometimes, even in great spaces like Fireside Adoptees. But we try to go by a guiding principle of wanting to support and be open for each other. And we also try to give people a chance. For example, I mentioned the interviews. I'll do a lot of interviews with people. Want them to have a chance to get their story out there.
That's great. And besides those live Zooms, you have the community on Facebook 24/7.
Yep.
And it's an adoptee only space.
Yes.
It's a private group that's adoptees only. So that's really nice. Well, that sounds very nurturing. And maybe especially if you're a new out of the fog or maybe thinking about coming out of the fog, that would be a good place to go if you're an adoptee.
Whatever your experience is, we would hope
anybody,
you would feel like, and like I said, nobody's going to try to convince you you're in the fog or not in the fog. We trying to make sure that the language people use when they communicate in that space is not to suggest, oh, you're deluded or you're confused or language like that happens in these groups. And it causes us to think about the structure we want to promote and how can we do a better job, because you don't know all those things when you set up a group and things happen right in front of you and you go, wow, what could we have done to have avoided that sort of situation? One of them is saying, don't go telling people you're in the fog or you're not in the fog. So we try really strongly not to do that. We don't want anyone to say, well, I don't feel welcome here because I had a good adoption story or I had a bad adoption story. People will say that, but it's not our official stance. We don't have our anti-adoption stance. We just support the adoptees.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys are very intentional the administration of Fireside Adoptees, you've actually really thought about this. And
I think people would be surprised. There's a charter, there's a mission statement.
Nice.
We have meeting minutes. We meet as a leadership team. There's nothing haphazard happening. Now it's a big group now, but we're trying our best as also people who are wounded, triggered people at times to unite a lot of people.
Yeah.
And not everybody's going to be happy in that space and they leave, and that's okay. We appreciate it if they don't try to diminish anybody on their way out, but we can't help that if that does happen. But yes, it's very intentional. To a degree, I think it would surprise people. It's not just like, oh, let's put together a group and see what happens. There's a lot of structure and a lot that goes into running a group like that.
Great. I'm in some adoptive parent groups, and you just like, where are the administrators? Just on the chats on Facebook, not live events, but just like, hello, knock, knock, knock. Is anybody watching what's going on here? So it sounds like you guys are really doing a great job in there. And then you just opened the Fireside Adoptees constellation because people like me kept saying, hey, I want in. And you're like, no, it's just for adoptees. And so you made one for anybody.
It is. And it's interesting. It's still a private group, but it's for anybody who was touched by adoption or has an interest in it. So we have donor conceived people in there. We have first parents in there. We have adoptive parents in there. And the intent is to learn to coexist and to provide the best support for people who are impacted by adoption or the adoptees. And modeling, meaning like providing the best information we can for people who really are willing to learn and want, like what you want, Beth, to how do I do this the best I can do this? I'm in this, whether I agree adoption should happen or not, I'm in this. What do I do now? That's the intention of the Constellation group.
It is great. I'm in that group. It's a great group.
Thank you.
And then you're also with the Adoption Trauma Network, which I'm not familiar with. So can you tell me and everybody else, what is the Adoption Trauma Network?
The Adoption Trauma Network is a group specifically for people. It's adoptees only, and there are no other. It's not that there are no other groups. There are smaller groups within it as well, but it's for adoptees only, and it's a trauma-informed space. Not that Fireside is not, but it's highly trauma-informed to the point where the intent of it is that people would come into our space and not get further injured.
Okay.
Not get traumatized by what they might experience there, meaning you have people come into the group and we want them to be intentional want them to agree that they'll use language a certain way. Not that we're trying to censor anyone. We're trying to respect the nervous system states of all the people in the group and say, some things are not good to talk about here. And not because we're trying to censure anybody, but out of respect for where other people are and what's hurt them, we're asking you not to engage in certain things, but we still want you to have a space to talk about what hurts. So that's a big part of the Adoption Trauma Network, is to provide a space like that, a trauma-informed space. None of these are therapeutic spaces. They're not run by therapists or people that are trying to promote healing techniques or anything like this. Although there are people who are certified in certain things about this, for sure, even within these groups. But it's meant to offer the best peer support for people to feel safe to share about what has wounded them in their lives. And for a lot of people, obviously for adoption, there's a relinquishment trauma. There's often adoption trauma, but then there are other traumas on top of that. And they all come into the group, and we will hear about a lot of different types of trauma, but we try to help people understand where some of the behaviors or reactions or thoughts they might have come out of being in a triggered state because of what happened to them. And that's something they can learn to accept about themselves. They're not defective or broken people.
Right. It's a natural response.
It's a natural response, as you've probably heard, to an unnatural situation. So we're trying to give people a refuge and a place for feeling respected in the state that they're in and not getting further injured, basically.
Nice. And those are live meetings as well, like online?
There is a live meeting for a smaller group within that.
Okay.
Within the Adoption Trauma Network. But basically, it's just a private Facebook group.
Okay. Where you type in the middle of the night.
Yeah. But we do have also, and I do facilitate a meeting for them. And there are other founders of the group who also facilitate meetings and will be shortly in there.
Nice. Okay. And the third group you're in and working in is Adoptees Connect, which is in person, right? That's
Yeah.
their big thing is in person. So by region.
Yeah. What a great experience that is. So when I moved back to New England, I was looking to join Adoptees Connect. I was in the Boston area. There isn't one in Massachusetts. There's no chapter.
Oh, no kidding.
No, there's one in Providence.
If you're listening in Massachusetts, go build a chapter.
They're coming to our chapter and to the
Oh
Rhode
my
Island,
gosh.
hopefully to the Rhode Island chapter too. But
Okay.
Providence has one and Derry,
Huh.
New Hampshire has one. And I ended up
Okay.
associated with the Derry, New Hampshire chapter since I'm here in New Hampshire. So obviously all of it is the work of Pamela Karanova, who
Mm-hmm.
created this amazing organization, Adoptees Connect, that has 50 different chapters and admins all
Wow.
around the country and in Canada, for example. But the person who had founded this branch of it here in New Hampshire was looking to hand it off.
Okay.
When I happened to ask about membership, she said, what would you want to join it and to actually run it? And I was thinking, wow. So that was an unexpected opportunity. And I thought about it for a while, but I thought, I do think I want to try that.
Nice.
She was familiar with me through Fireside,
Uh-huh.
and that helped. It helped that I had some experience doing that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
I bet. Now you meet monthly in person?
Yeah. Once a month is the minimum you meet in person, and you meet within 30 or 40 miles of the central location. Now it says Derry,
Okay.
New Hampshire. There's no place you could go called Adoptees Connect in Derry, New Hampshire. It's just, this is the local region.
Okay.
Might meet somewhere around here.
Like at a coffee shop or something, or
Yeah.
or somebody's house, or
Yeah, so far we've done restaurants and coffee shops. People come from Vermont, they come from Maine,
whoa.
from Massachusetts, because there's really not a lot of stuff happening in the New England area for adoptees. So
Wow.
very amazing group of people, very thoughtful.
Mhm.
It's a great group of guys in there that come
Mhm.
that I really appreciate because there's not a lot of male voices out there talking about adoption. So
Why is that? Are more girls adopted in general, or are they just more talkative?
I think it's because of the stigma around males. It's supposed to not be as emotional about some things. And also like, oh, this is something that happened to me and I can handle it. And it's not really a problem. So a lot of male adoptees stay in the fog. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Say that safely because I've seen it happen.
Well, that's good. There's some guys coming out though to the.
Oh yeah, they're
to all of the different ones, right?
Oh yeah, in our group, for example, I listen to these guys. There's a group of 3 guys that I'm just blown away by in terms of their ability to articulate, their maturity about what they're processing, and
nice.
how candid they are. It's very difficult to be vulnerable like that in front of other men.
Sure. Yeah.
You come there and you say, I feel like crying because I'm finally talking to people who understand me. And my whole life, I thought I didn't have a problem with this.
Yeah.
And it's impacted me. And suddenly I have this chance and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to fall apart in front of everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And you say, it's okay. You can fall apart in front of us and help pick up the pieces. And yeah, I can't imagine you coming out of the fog like you did in that moment and not having these groups to help you. That would have been really terrible. So thank goodness your brain let you do that when you knew you had some groups that you could kind of lean on for a while.
Yeah.
I bet that was invaluable.
Yeah. And you need the support of adoptees.
Yeah.
People who get it. That's really what you need when that happens.
Yeah. I recently asked my son if he would like to connect with some men adoptees that have offered to talk to him anytime. And every once in a while, I just remind him, hey, in case you're interested, these guys are available. And he's like, Mom, I know you keep offering this, but I am afraid to talk to other adoptees because I'm afraid they're going to reject me. And my heart just breaks. I'm like, of course you are. That's your core wound. That's your it's your abandonment issues right there. But oh my God, if anyone could understand that, other adoptees would.
Yes.
And so I'm just going to keep offering it like a smorgasbord every once in a while. Hey, look at all these.
That's great that you're doing that because he needs to know that's out there. And not that we ever want anybody to push anybody into it, but you're not doing that. You're just saying, I want you to know this is available. I want you to know people will want to hear from you. But I understand exactly where he's coming from. And I know a lot of people who feel similarly.
I'm sure it's scary.
I remember one person coming into Fireside and saying, I'm scared. I haven't done this and I can't fool any of you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I bet you just feel naked because they know your shit. They understand what's going on. And I bet a lot of adoptees have had people maybe in their adoptive family or in the community saying, It's nothing.
Oh, yeah.
And they have gotten rejected when they've brought things up. And I'm sure that makes them hesitant to talk about it again.
Very much.
But man, if people can, I don't know how to get the nerve up to do it, but these Facebook groups are ideal because it's just reading at first, right? You just like read some notes. That's not super tough, and you can go in as an alias or whatever, right? If
Yep.
you need
People
to.
do all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you would say to someone who is kind of afraid or hesitant to join a group like that?
I would say that I would encourage somebody it's a risk, right? It's a big risk though, because it's a risk of ourself. And I would encourage somebody to say, if you even think you might want to do this, just go and listen. Don't turn your camera on.
Yeah.
Don't say anything. Just listen. And that happens a lot. People do that, and it takes weeks and months, and sometimes they open up and sometimes they don't. But we're just glad they're there.
Yeah.
Because they're processing what they're hearing, whether they want or are able to participate or not is really not the point. It's that they can be exposed to what's out there and available for them.
It might be the first time they can have somebody that understands what they're going through.
Very often.
Or that's saying similar things. Yeah.
They'll say that out loud a lot.
Wow,
People
really?
say, I've never done this.
Oh.
I didn't know any adoptees. I didn't either.
Yeah.
When I first started this, it's not at all uncommon to have people say, I've never done anything like this. I didn't even know adoptees until I stepped into this space. And
wow.
yeah, it happens all the time.
Well, that's why I wanted to feature this, because I know you've talked about your adoption story in other places, and I wanted to really focus on this because I want to encourage adoptees to go find it, and I want to encourage adoptive parents, help your kids find out where these things are. And there are support groups for teens, and I've seen support groups for as young as 10-year-old adoptees, and the community just needs to kind of help these adoptees find these places and feel somehow able to risk it to go check it out. And there are plenty of them. You're in 3 of them, and there's more where that came from, right? And so I think everybody can find one that might work for them. And like I said before, it sounds like you're very intentional, very conscious of keeping everyone as safe as possible in these spaces. And I really admire that about what you're doing in these other groups, all these groups. And I will definitely put all the links to the 3 groups we mentioned in the notes so people can find those 3 groups. I'll put the Adoptees Connect in general because you might want to find it in your own neighborhood. So you don't have to go to New Hampshire unless you live there.
Yeah, we're glad to have you if you do.
Yeah, if you live in New Hampshire or Boston area, right?
Yep.
And if people wanted to get in touch with you, Greg, what would be the best way to do that?
Probably through Instagram.
Okay, Instagram.
Greg Gentry 22
Okay.
is the easiest way. They can also find me on Facebook.
Okay, Facebook or Instagram. I'll put your handles there.
I'm always happy to hear from adoptees.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so if you want to ask Greg which group would be the best, or, if you need help tippy-toeing into the waters, Greg's your guy. You have a very gentle spirit and a very compassionate person. So I appreciate that about you very much.
I want to thank you for listening, Beth, for even hosting something like this. Is it really a wonderful thing? So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to have you on. Is there anything else you'd like to say that I didn't ask you about?
I think we covered some great things here. And I would just encourage adoptive parents to listen to the stories, listen and be open and be willing to help people search.
Yes.
Realize they'll grow up. If you think, I'm keeping them from something that I think is traumatic, they're entitled to know their story and to decide for themselves what they want to do about it. And please do your best to put them in the center. That's, I guess, what I would say. And thank you for doing that, Beth, because I know you try very hard to do that.
Yes, I do. And we're trying to move adoptive parents forward so we can be better for our adopted kids and adopted children who are also grown up that become adults, like you say.
Yes,
our children are adults way longer than they're children to us, right? So.
Correct.
Well, thanks again, Greg, for being on. And I hope people will share this episode with anyone they know who might be an adoptee or another adoptive parent or someone in the community that might not have any idea about all these kinds of things that adoptees go through and these resources that are available. So I really hope that Unraveling Adoption is a hub for resources. I really love sharing resources. So I think these 3 support groups are really amazing. So everyone go check that out. And check out Unraveling Adoption on Facebook and on Instagram, on YouTube. Our website is unravelingadoption.com. And just this week, I have created a community calendar where I have gathered all sorts of events relating to adoption and some for addiction and mental health as well. And there are events for adoptees, adoptive parents, allies, kids, teens, all sorts of events. This will be an ongoing calendar, and it is available at unravelingadoption.com/calendar. I have put the Fireside Adoptees support groups in the calendar, and there's even a link if you would like to submit your own events. This, I hope, will be a wonderful community resource for everyone. And we do have a Patreon if you're willing and interested in supporting us with a small donation, $5, $10, $25 a month, that helps us maintain our commercial-free status. So it does cost money to do this podcast and all the stuff. So I really would appreciate that. It's patreon.com/unraveling adoption. And thanks again, Greg. I really am happy to know you.
Thank you so much, Beth.
And congratulations for all the great work you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And Greg and I want you all to stay safe.